Go ahead and introduce our speaker. I've been looking for our speaker, or looking forward to our speaker coming and talking to us for quite a while, mainly because our speaker has worked with one of the largest corporations in America quite actively. He's worked with IBM, been on the executive council with IBM, and has helped change the direction of the company into microcomputers and into some of the computerized systems. Also, the biggest thing is on working with the creativity. Large corporations have a big problem where once they get rolling, sometimes the creativity gets stifled. And they need to be able to learn how to actively and aggressively bring this creativity to the surface and be able to let it be expressed and welcomed in their organizations. And our speaker has done this and has quite a few techniques and tips for us to do this. He is now a consultant for many of the Fortune 500 companies. I'd like to go ahead and welcome Lou Mobley.
Good morning. Am I correct that this should be about a half-hour thing? And I would also hope that if I save enough time of that half hour, we can have some exchange and questions and answers and so forth. So I'll try to discipline myself. How do you talk about creativity in 20 minutes? Be creative. Here we go. I'm going to hit a few highlights of insights. I like the word insights better than techniques about creativity, because I honestly believe that if we're interested in being creative and participating in creative activity, that we are facing an issue of values and attitudes more than techniques and method. And I'm going to try to emphasize some of these value issues that I have found more frequently expressed by creative people, not in terms of what they say, but in terms of how they behave. You're aware, as I am, that the world is changing much faster than it ever has before in all of history. 1945 seems to have been a point of discontinuity in history. Interesting studies have been made of the slow rate of progress. We thought it was normal rate of progress up until 1945. But no matter what you try to measure that might be quantified in terms of progress, all of the curves seem to be almost flat. The rate at which plants and animals grow was what we thought was normal growth. In 1945, all of those curves suddenly shot upward. So the question has been raised, particularly through the 50s and 60s, what happened in and about 1945? And one of the more interesting suggestions that have been made is that that's about the time we discovered creativity. In other words, we could deliberately be creative. We could deliberately make change. Change was not threatening, it was looked for. And most important of all, perhaps, we discovered group creativity. Now, the reason I say discovered is because if you look in the library under creativity and pull out all the references, 90% of all the data in libraries pertains to individual creativity. You know, studies of the composer, the artist, the inventor, working alone. Individual was considered prior to that date to be an individual phenomenon. What has really happened since 1945 is that we've discovered a phenomena that we might just simply call group creativity. Now, why is it that a group of people, if they want to, and if they have the attitudes that I want to address in a few minutes, can be more creative than any one of those individuals working alone, or the sum total of all those individuals working alone? Team effort, for example, has been a relatively new idea. Task forces, a relatively new idea. Business itself, once it catches on to the idea of tapping a diverse number of individuals with different competences, with different attitudes, and even with different values, can be creative provided they have the glue that holds them together, which we now recognize is common purpose. And so group effort requires what the group I was sitting with a few minutes ago was addressing, this business of affirmations or visualization. How do you visualize or create in consciousness a state of affairs that you would like to come true? I used to call it thought forms, creating thought forms. That's about the best word we had for it back in the 50s and 60s. Now we have better words for it, like visualizations, which can be feelings as well as thoughts. And we have visualizations, affirmations, goals, purposes. All of those are words that refer to this common element, which, if bought into by every member of a group, gives it the glue so that it can feed on the diversity within that group to become creative. Now let me talk about a few of the dimensions that are related to this idea of group creativity. One of the themes that fascinates me more than any other is what I call the paradigm of diversity. Our Western culture has somehow convinced us that there is a certain desirable ideal, a perfect person, a perfect company. If you read Search for Excellence, they're trying to find the perfect company, the perfect group, the perfect church. I don't think there's such a thing as perfection, unless you define what you're trying to conform to. I think of myself not as a perfect person, but as a perfect whatever I am. I think we in the West have somehow been convinced that there is an ideal if we could only find it. If we could only find it. And so we spend our life searching for that which we want to be, the value we should believe in, the religion which is true, the company which is perfect. And we somehow fail to see or understand or feel that the only thing that is everywhere apparent in the universe is diversity. We somehow abhor diversity, but that's the way nature operates. I think creativity thrives on diversity. And in human terms, I feel, are going to have to learn to respect differences. Respect differences. We tend to run away from people if they're too different from us. Birds of a feather like to flock together. A surefire recipe for non-creativity. We in the West perhaps have too many keepers of the order, preservers of the status quo. There's still a minority of people who are the change makers, who like to do something a little different, who like to depart from the norm, who don't mind being on each end of that bell-shaped curve, because it's risky out there, mainly because you're different. You might be called a deviant. Or you might even be called neurotic. You're different from the norm. In school, they will certainly flunk you because you're not on the norm. And I'm just suggesting that this might be a mindset, a value orientation that our culture might re-examine. Because everything we do to conform to whoever says is good, right, or true is telling us, we don't want you to be too creative. You might rock the boat. And if you rock the boat, it sets up waves. And if you set up waves, it's going to rock every boat on the lake. You see, that's what they tell us. Our schools tell us that. Many churches tell us that. Our corporations tell us that. In effect, they're asking for not too much creativity. So how do we keep these two things in balance? The need for order and the need for change. It's a little bit like the balance we need to achieve between our left brain and our right brain. We now know that inside of our heads we have this tension going on. A left brain part of us that seems to ask for logic, rationality, conformity, structure, keep things like they are, order. But yet there's another side of us that has nothing to do with logic or order or custom. It has to do with the affective part of ourselves. Trust, love, feelings, emotions, imagination, all of those things that science, as we have known it, cannot deal with. The things we call human in our right brain. And we find people even today running around appealing that we become more left brain or become more right brain. Of course, the custom right now in our culture is to become more right brain, more feeling, more imagination, more human.